vós orareis assim: Pai nosso que estais nos céus, santificado seja o teu nome. Venha o teu reino, seja feita a tua vontade, assim na terra como no céu. O pão nosso de cada dia nos dá hoje, e perdoa-nos as nossas dívidas, assim como nós perdoamos aos nossos devedores. E não nos conduzas à tentação, mas livra-nos do mal. Teu é o reino, e o poder, e a glória, para sempre. Amém.
I raise a hallelujah in the presence of my enemies. I raise a hallelujah louder than the unbelief. I raise a hallelujah. My weapon is a melody. I raise a hallelujah. And heaven comes to fight for me. In the middle of the mystery, heaven comes to fight for me. In the middle of the mystery, I will watch the darkness flee. I raise a hallelujah, with everything inside of me. I raise a hallelujah. I will watch the darkness flee. I raise a hallelujah in the middle of the mystery. Oh, I raise a hallelujah. Be lost your hold on me. I'm gonna sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're gonna hear my praise.
Right. Okay. I think that was more than a 5-minute break. That's okay. Okay. I'm going to make a slight shift in our little schedule because I'm looking at the time, and I really want to spend some time on young adults and faith. I think it's really, really crucial for us to sort of understand this concept. And I'm going to try to work through it, and then I'm really kind of interested in some of your reactions from it, especially from the young adults here. So let me test it on you. Let's see where it goes, and we'll go from there. Let's see. Are more people coming in? Hey, we're going to start. They're still coming in now. Come on in, everybody. Woo! All right. Oh, they're closing the doors. Now it's serious, right? So great. Okay, good. So I want to. I'm just going to jump to talking about young adults and faith. I think it's going to be really, really great to explore this with you. Okay. And the subtitle is Young Adults' Faith and Their Quests to Be Faithful. I really believe that with all my heart, that people want to be faithful with their lives. Now, we probably can all give examples of people who aren't or whatever, right? But I think deep down, I think people live because they want their life to matter in some way, shape, or form, okay? And I think that's a great place to start. I think that allows us, in some ways, to connect with just about anybody. I think the comment that was made earlier, which I think is really, really true, I can relate to some young adults, maybe in the Adventist circles, but I don't know how to relate to other people. I think sometimes, and I get that, I think that's a really, really true feeling. And I think I've learned over the years that I had to stop thinking about people and starting where the differences are, but to start where we agree, right? There's too much in our world today in discourse of where we start where we disagree rather than where we agree. And I think if we actually extend grace to each other, I think we actually agree on a lot more than we realize. And I think that we all have some similar desires that we can start with. And I think if we can even, if it's only connecting with our humanity, that's a great place to start, right? So, I think when it comes to faith, I don't think so much about this idea of some people have faith and some people don't. I actually think there's something else going on here quite dramatically that I think might be helpful to you and maybe your own journey. So let's see if we can talk about this. So one of the frameworks that we use in our work at the Fuller Youth Institute is we believe that there are three prevailing questions that young adults ask, and quite frankly, all people ask, okay? They're questions of identity, belonging, and purpose, okay? I don't care who you are, you're asking about them. But there's something that's happening that's kind of unique, and that is when it comes to identity, the way that I define it is it's a set of beliefs concerning who one is in relation to one's personal attributes, relationships, and group affiliations. So we don't have an identity, we have actually identities. Young adults are finally at the point in their brain development, your brain isn't completely developed till 25, but also have the psychological ego, in the best sense of that word, to actually be able to reflect on your life. And you begin to ask questions like, how do I think about myself in relation to my gender, to my religious upbringing, to my sexual orientation, to my race, to my ethnicity, to my social location, to where I grew up? All these things play into how we see ourselves. And if what we're doing is in many ways trying to harmonize all these things because they don't always fit together nice and neatly. So there's a tremendous amount of work that a young adult is going through trying to think about that. What do I think of as more central than the others? What am I bringing with me? What am I changing? How do these work together? How have I experienced being a person in this world, right? We've all had different experiences that have somehow shaped the identities that we've had. And so there's a lot of work that goes into that. Some of our identities are really probably like spot on, and others are a bit fractured in just the ways that we've had experience or what people have told us, right? So there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into this who am I question that becomes incredibly important important for young adults. Now, again, everybody is thinking about this, but there's something unique about the third decade of life. This is really the place where the ways that I'm beginning to conceptualize who I am and how I'm connected and what I do actually have a way of impacting the trajectory of my life going forward. So, like young adults feel it more intensely than people who are older, okay? So that's identity. Then you have belonging, and this is like this where do I fit question. What's interesting about belonging is this, is that the way we define it is, it's the sense of one is connected to and can trust a community in which one can exert influence, have one's needs met, and mutually share emotional connection with others. What people get wrong sometimes when it comes to belonging is that we just think it's me saying to you, hey, you belong here. Like, you're welcome here, right? That is on every church website. Okay? Now that's important. Well, welcome is important. But do you notice the definition? Someone feels like they belong not just when they are welcomed, but where they feel that they can somehow exert influence on the community and contribute to the community that makes a difference with the community. Okay? I feel belong when I'm invited, but also I'm able to give to the community. And what happens a lot of times, and I hear with a lot of young adults oftentimes in a lot of different churches, is they said, yes, we were welcomed, but as soon as I came into the community, my voice wasn't heard. I had these passions, and they wanted to put me in the children's ministry. There are some people that have passions for children's ministry, but that's not where I wanted to be, right? So something happened where all of a sudden their presence was short-circuited once they were welcomed, right? And so this idea of belonging has this dynamic associated with it, which I think is really, really crucial. It kind of came up in the panel up here, right? I feel really supported when people want to invest in me, but they also inspire my gifts so that I can invest in the community as well. Did you hear that? Right? That's sort of what's going on with the sense of belonging there. And then with purpose, I think it comes down to this idea of what difference can I make? And I think this is just a really important thing. In emerging adult space, you're sort of beginning to ask for the first time. In adolescence, you don't think about this. You're like, oh, what do I want to be? I want to be a basketball player. I'm starting to think about maybe a career, but not really. But there's something that happens in the 20s where you're like, wow, what do I really want to do? What's my fingerprint on the world? And I was having a great conversation at the break that reminded me of something. I think that we are told up into our 20s that we can be anything that we want to be, but that is misinterpreted in thinking that you have to be everything. And you feel the pressure of that. Okay, so young people are told, do you really want me to say it again? Or are you just, young people are told they can be anything they want to be, and what they hear is that you have to be everything. Okay? And so what happens in the 20s is this is a bit of my thinking, but I think we see it in a lot of different places. When you, in your 20s, choose a direction to go with your life, education, career, whatever you want to do with your life, that can be exciting. But have you ever noticed that you also grieve something? A yes in one direction ultimately means there's a no in another direction because you can't be everything. Okay? An example, like, I don't know if you ever had this experience. I had this experience every once in a while. Like, you're like looking for a job, and you have all these people that are interested in you. You're like, oh, we're interested, and you're interested, and you're like, oh, everybody loves me. And then at some point, you have to choose one. And it's like, well, I just like being liked. I don't know if I want to choose one of these, right? Like, you know what I mean? So when we say yes to something, we say no to something else. And that's not just like a no. It's like a no to a trajectory. Like if I choose to be an educator, that means I'm saying no to be an artist or an engineer or something like that, right? And there's a grief that comes with that. And I wish we had more spaces where we could actually grieve that. Like we only talk about our successes, we don't actually talk about our grieves. Like I'm really sad that I can't do that anymore because I've decided I've chosen this career path, right? I think is really, really challenging. And so I think that becomes really, really important. And so the purpose, though, is this commitment to a meaningful goal that leads to behavior that works toward that goal, right? So we take a dream and we begin to activate it in our 20s, which is really, really, really crucial. I ask my graduate students often, what's your gift to the world and how are you developing it? Okay, so there's two things that are happening there. Number one, I'm assuming that you have a gift, but I'm also challenging you to develop it, right? This is what becomes really, really important, and that's where the hard work comes, because we sort of have to lean into that. Another thing I'll just say about purpose, which maybe some of you experienced it, my guess is at some level you probably have, is that after we get into our teens, into our 20s, what sort of carries us is raw talent, and then there's a point somewhere in our 20s where all of a sudden you hit the wall. Like, raw talent doesn't do it anymore. Like, you actually have to dig into what you really want to do. That's a really scary moment, right? Because now all of a sudden you have to like recalibrate what your purpose is, and you have to realize it's like, I've got to lean into this. If I really want it, like it's gonna require something more of me to do that, right? So identity, belonging, and purpose have these deep, profound ways of shaping us, the way we think about ourselves, the way we relate with each other, the way that we think about the trajectories of our lives. And everybody goes through this, but this is something that's really, really like central to emerging adults, and they're thinking about this. And I think these things are deeply spiritual, okay? Like, this is not just heady stuff. This is like my being, right? So when we think about that in light of like my identity in Christ, my belonging with the community, my purpose or my calling in life, like these things have a tremendous amount of weight to them. And I believe this is what emerging adults are thinking about. So let me talk about this idea of faith then. I mean, what do we talk about when we talk about faith? And what I find is that when we talk about faith, a lot of times in church circles, we kind of talk about faith like a noun. I have faith, you have faith. You should share your faith. You have lost your faith. Do you notice how the faith is used? It's like a possession. It's like a thing. And so when people say they've lost their faith, we all freak out. They're like, where did it go? We got to get it. We got to find it, get it back, right? Okay? And like people freak out. Like, oh my gosh, how's Steve doing? Well, he lost his faith. Oh. What do we do with that, right? And so there's this panic that sort of comes with that, right? And so I think that if we really look at the scriptures and we understand sort of faith formation, we recognize the fact that we don't just noun faith, we also verb faith. We don't just faith, we actually are faithing, okay? Faithing is something that is in motion. It's constantly moving, changing, becoming, morphing. It has to, because we are growing, moving, changing, becoming, right? If you talk with anybody, they're like, yeah, church was really great when I was younger, but I just don't have much of a need anymore for it. Well, you know what? Or, faith or whatever. What is that? Well, somehow they thought that faith was a noun, and it worked for a while, and it doesn't work anymore. And so I think that we oftentimes get quite anxious about faith and doubt and everything associated with it, because we think that somehow there's a losing of faith and we don't necessarily have it anymore. And I actually think faithing has this deeper sense to it. Let me give you another example that I think is really important for us to understand this. Some of you that maybe took beginning psychology or studied Piaget might know this particular concept. He says there's a great difference between assimilation and accommodation. Okay, so assimilation works like this. Let's say this cup is sort of symbolic of the way I think the world works. Okay, it's a cup, it has some definition, I see it, I think this is the way the world works. And the experiences or knowledge that I gain while I'm looking at the worldview this way are oftentimes like little drops of water, right? And in my mind, every time a drop of water goes into this container that can handle that drop, my mind says, it makes sense, it makes sense, it makes sense. That's assimilation. I'm assimilating what I'm learning or experiencing, and it's fitting into this particular way I'm viewing the world, and it just makes sense, okay? Assimilation. Now, what would be accommodation? If I were to take that piano and try to put it in this cup, what will happen? Should I try it? I could never pick it up. Maybe Benjamin could. What? It would utterly shatter, right? There's no way that piano is going to fit into this cup. What is going on there is that there is something that has come into my life that the way I view the world, the way I view God, the way I view myself cannot handle that information. What is that piano in this example? It's a parent's divorce once I left for college. It's the first failing grade that I got, and I've been a straight A student. It's the first time that I fell in love and she broke up with me. It's the first time that I lost my grandparent. It's the first time that a friend disowned me. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal to us older types, like, yeah, you'll get through it. But for someone in their teens and their 20s to go through that experience for the first time, it is raw. And in that rawness, what often comes out from people of faith, young people of faith, is, well, I thought the world worked this way. I thought that if I was obedient to God, that bad things wouldn't happen to me. I thought that if I was a good Christian, that things were supposed to go rightly. I thought that if I just followed Jesus, that everything and all the blessings would come by way. And that must not be true, so I'm not sure I believe in God anymore. And that's when the community goes, right? But think about it for a second. This worldview and this God is too small. It worked for a while, but it can't handle the new information or experiences that we begin to accumulate as we begin to grow up. So instead of assimilating that piano impossibly into the way I hold the world, I have to allow this cup to break apart. And I have to build a big enough container that can hold that experience or that information that I'm working through, right? That is accommodation, and that is what faithing is all about. It's constantly being open to the possibility that God is bigger than the way we see God, that our connection with God is more profound than we could ever imagine. I like to tell people, like, you believe in the good news? It's actually better than that. It's always better than that, right? Like you think you know God? Oh, it's even better. Like you're only scratching the surface. Like, you know what I mean? The book of Acts, wrong title. It just should be like blow your mind. Because I feel like you got the early church that are like, oh, we got this thing. Jesus rose from the dead. Wait a minute. God loves you too? And then you're like, whoa, wait a minute. Gentiles? You know what I mean? Like, it is a wild ride. I think the disciples are just having their minds blown all the way. Because why? Because their view of who Jesus is and what the resurrection is and what God is only this big. And then every chapter is just blown up bigger and bigger. That's the kind of faith thing I want to have. I just want to have my mind blown away all the time, right? And we need to give permission for each other to be people that are open to faithing rather than thinking that it's just about this one way of thinking about faith. And I would hope that this gives us hope. For those of you in this room, and I'm sure there are some, that are just doubting the whole enterprise. Like, you're along for the ride, you like the people, it's really great. But like deep down, you're like, yeah, it's just not working for me. Maybe it's not that you are unfaithful. Maybe you're on the cusp of a new form of faithing. Maybe you have a son or daughter or grandchild that you think is far away from the faith because they're not sort of showing up the way that they used to. There could be a lot of things going on there, but it doesn't mean that they've lost a sense of like their understanding of God. It's just that somehow it's not connecting. Maybe there's more hope for them than we're giving them the possibility to think about. What if they're just trying to faith their way through and we just need to help them and accompany them along the way, right? It gives us a breath of fresh air to not give up on people because they're not showing up or acting in the same ways that they did before. Now, there's always complicated things to that. I don't want to simplify that too much, but there's a little bit of hope in that, right? Which I think is really, really great. I'm always struck by, that's another whole sermon, I'll have to give you some time, but like Peter, when he walked on the water and like Jesus grabs him, and he says, oh, Peter, why did you doubt, right? Do you ever notice when we read that passage, oftentimes, I don't know about you, I'll just talk about me. Like when I would read that passage in my earlier years, I always thought that Jesus was clicking his tongue and like had this really sad tone. Oh, Peter, there you go again. Why did you doubt? Okay, the way I think about that passage now, I think there are wind and waves all over the place. I think Peter is out of his mind, freaked out. And I think Jesus grabs him and he holds him close and he is laughing. He's like, Peter, why did you doubt? You almost had it. Do it again. You know? I mean, do you see the difference? Like, I actually think Peter actually took a risk. And I think Jesus was actually really excited about it. Like, is there a possibility that we are missing the opportunity to let people step into these spaces where they might move into a new reality, that they're able to see God in a bigger and more profound way? And I'm all about that. And I think that emerging adults are looking for that. And I think it's really, really important. And I think faithing begins to shape it in that way. Now, this faithing trajectory is a really interesting one. We know that as a teenager to a young adult, that some faith formation work would actually say this, that for a teenager, something is true because an authority or personality says it's true, and it's true because we all believe it, okay? This is why developmentally, teenagers love youth group, right? There is a youth pastor that I can trust. I don't know what Jesus looks like, but this youth pastor loves me, and they're the closest thing to Jesus that I know, and if they believe it, it's got to be true, okay? I have other friends, we're together, we believe the same thing, it must be true, okay? Now, for a teenager, that is completely 100% appropriate, okay? Side note, when a youth pastor leaves and goes somewhere else, and teenagers are like, I don't think I believe in God anymore, do you see what happened? They lost an authority figure in their life, and there's a hole there, and they don't know where to look. Right? And so there's this dissonance that they feel that's associated with that. Now, for a younger emerging adult, they begin to interrogate their assumptions. And they begin to say, it's true when it makes sense to me. And so this is where in the late teens, early 20s, a lot of times you have 20-somethings that are always like asking the dreadful question that nobody likes in church, why? Why don't we have drums? Why do we care about that social issue but not this social issue? Why does the budget go toward that when it could go toward that? How come we have to be in this room but they get to be in that room, right? And you've got some people that get really offended by that, right? But what we have to understand is that in that moment, young adults are not trying to be difficult. They're actually trying to make sense of a dissonance that they're feeling on the inside, and they're actually wanting answers to the why questions because they're trying to understand how it all works, okay? And so that becomes really, really important. And then I think an older and emerging adult moves to this idea of, hey, something could be true, but I actually could be wrong. There's this ability to hold a bit of ambiguity, a little bit of tension, recognizing the fact that sometimes we don't always agree on everything, but there are maybe some central things that we agree on. And there's a generosity toward each other as well. And I think that becomes really, really important. What's interesting about faith development is that it doesn't just necessarily grow with the person. Sometimes faith development, someone will stay in a particular stage and they keep growing and it's sort of, they stay in the same stage. And this is especially true for sort of the teenagers or what some would call the loyalist stage, okay? I worked at a church of a relatively popular pastor, and we had droves of people that came, and when he left, a big percentage of them went up and went to look for the next big thing. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh, okay, so I was offended by that because I thought, we have a good church, and I love this church in so many ways, but you could see this happening. But I'm like, oh, I get it. I mean, if you're looking for an authority figure that can tell you how to live your faith and that person is gone, you are going to go find somebody else that can fill that role, right? This easily happens. And so, I think we just need to recognize that our faithing trajectory can have this sort of element to it. And this is important for the work that we do. On top of that, faithing, through some of the research that I have done, doesn't just have an intellectual component. So sometimes someone will say to you, I'm sure you've never done this, I've done it, so I'll just confess it. Someone will be like, hey, I'm really struggling about this thing. And my impulse is to be like, oh, you're really struggling? Let me give you a book, or you should listen to this podcast. Okay? Do you notice what I'm doing? I'm assuming that there's an intellectual problem, and if you just figure it out and have the right thinking, then you'll just sort of be on your way. Okay? Now, the intellectual is important, and sometimes that's true, but we also know that faithing has an emotional and relational component to it. Okay? Sometimes it's deeply relational. The reason that someone is doubting their faith is because they had a fallout with a community member in their church. Another feeling they might be struggling with their faith is because they feel this deep sense of shame. I talk with a lot of college students who talk about their doubt, and they'll say to me, I'm probably the only one. I'm like, do you know how many times someone has said to me, I'm probably the only one? Like, too many times. It's amazing how we feel isolated when we begin to raise questions or doubts are associated with it. So this intellectual, emotional, relational piece becomes really, really important. On top of that, faith is funny in this way. We know from student development that there are two types of environments, generally speaking. There's something called day campus and also called night campus. Day campus is the places that students go to learn in formalized places. The classroom, chapel, student gatherings, right, that are sort of formalized and institutionally blessed, right? But we also know the day campus, and the classroom in particular, is actually really high risk. People don't typically want to raise their hands or share their opinion in classroom because it's a high-risk situation. Like, I don't know if I want to do that. But as soon as the class is over, all the conversations are happening outside in the hallway. That's night campus, okay? I mean, maybe we even felt it in this room, right? And I think this is true of church as well. Church can feel high stakes. You come in this space, and we sort of put on a certain persona, kind of spiritual, kind of guarded, because we're not sure this is actually, as some of you said earlier, a safe place to talk about the people that we really are. But I'll tell you something, in the parking lot afterward, that's where the conversations really happen, right? So I wonder, as we think about young adult ministry, if we pay attention to the fact that, wow, we certainly should and can have formalized ministries in the day campus space, we have to be aware that there are a lot of conversations that are happening in the night campus places of a ministry. Now, some of you are like, hey, maybe we could get into the night campus spaces, because if that's where they are, we should just show up there. My only caution with that is that's kind of like Facebook, right? Like all the college students were there, and then all the old people showed up, and they left, right? So I don't know if you can as soon as certain people step into night campus, it becomes day campus again. I don't know how that works. We kind of chase it, right? So you guys will have to figure that out. But if we're aware of it, I think it's really, really important, right? So this is a great example. So if you don't come to my church on Sunday morning and I get mad at you and I'm like, why didn't you come to church? I thought you believed in God. I'm not taking into account that perhaps you just had a late night conversation with someone and I know nothing about it. Like, could it be possible that people are trying to do their faith thing all over the place? We're just not looking in the right places. And we're just assuming that there's only one place for that to happen. I think there's a generosity that needs to come with that, especially with that crazy slide that I showed you at the beginning where people are all over the place, right? Like, we just have to be open to that. And so I think hopefully that gives us a broader view of where faith thing's happening and what's actually going on, which I think becomes really, really important. I shared this a little bit in my sermon this morning, but in some of the work that I did. I mean, this idea of intellectual, emotional, and relational struggle becomes really, really crucial. Intellectually, the students who are evangelical students at a public university, I think some of you mentioned that before, they doubted their inherited religious beliefs and acknowledged dissonance between their spiritual beliefs and their academic studies. And so they sort of suspended the contradictions. They said it was there, but that's about it. Emotionally, they experienced negative feelings of on the side rather than more desirable feelings. Feelings are feelings. They're not good or bad, but some are more desirable than others. And these are feelings of anxiety, of shame, that they felt more than anything else. And then relationally, they just struggled separating from traditional evangelical communities as they sought new ones. And so there was this feeling of like, if I bring up these issues, it's going to be a problem. And so this is a place of great vulnerability. Like, this isn't just fixing their thinking. This is a vulnerable space. So when we say to an emerging adult who doesn't show up at church, like, why didn't you show up? Or even worse, like, do you even believe in God anymore? That's sort of adding insult to injury to already a very vulnerable space for them, right? I don't know how it works particularly, but a practice that I have with my students is like when they will like email me and say, I can't make class, or some are like, I can't make class, do you need me to send you like proof of a medical thing from a doctor? I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't have time to read all that. But what I've learned to say to them is this. Before I even get mad about them not showing up, I just say this to them. Are you all right? And I cannot tell you the conversations that I've had with some of my students. Like, I just opened that door a little bit. And I realized that them not coming to class had nothing to do with my class, but because of something that they're carrying or holding on in their life. And I was the person in that episodic moment that has the wherewithal to say, are you all right? Like, I just feel like that's a better answer. Like, young people aren't showing up at the church. Are you all right? You all right? What do you need? What do I need to understand? How can I help you? I feel like that would be a different response to what's there. I mentioned this before in the sermon this morning. There's also something deeply contagious about this. Like the doubt that young people go through is felt by the community, and I think sometimes the community panics. And we want to fix them rather than recognize the fact that maybe what we need to do is sit with them, because maybe there is this moment where there is something quite profound that's happening there. Let me test this on you, young adults. So I'm kind of curious what you think about this. So in some of the work that I'm doing with transitions, in light of this vulnerability and this contagiousness and everything else, I've been thinking about this idea of transition theologically as this idea of pilgrimage. Okay, if we look at the First and Second Testaments of the Scriptures, we see that the people of God are like in motion all the time, for good and bad reasons, right? Like they're on pilgrimage, they're wandering in the wilderness, they're all over the place, right? We see this in, again, like the early church too, right? Like there's persecution and everything is happening, but they are on the move. There's never any, like, crazy stuff's going on, right? What I find fascinating is this, is that it seems as though, as I read the Scriptures and I see people in motion, it seems as though that they seem to be very attuned to the presence of God. That the people in motion actually are the ones that have a closer vantage point to God moving in such a way and leading them in such a way that is quite unique and special compared to when the people of God settled down. It seems like when the people of God settled down, that's when the idols started popping up. All right? That's kind of a crazy thought, right? So what if, young adult, if you can't be a consistent member at a church, or your life is in so much motion, what if that is not a place of shame or embarrassment, but what if it is a unique perspective that you have in proximity to God, where you are encountering a God that moves with you, and you actually have something not only to say to yourself, but you have something to say to our communities as well. Like, I don't want you to be tolerated in our faith communities. I kind of need you to contribute to our communities because we need you. Kind of interesting thought, huh? I don't know what you think about that. We can talk about it at the end. But I wonder if there's a different way to sort of think about your in-motion lives as not a deficit, but actually maybe something that's quite unique and quite needed in our world today. Huh? So I think about that with faithing and all that comes with that. So how do we think about mentoring when it comes to faithing? Just some really quick thoughts on this. I know we're getting late and it's like almost 5. When I think about like the teenage years, I think this is a place of discovery and potential. I do think like, hey, what do you want to be? What does life look like? Dream with me, I think is possible, and I think really, really helpful in the adolescent years. I think when we move from 18 to 20, some of the research would suggest that 18 to 20, especially the early, this early emerging adulthood, this is the place where oftentimes a young person steps out for the first time, either college, job, work, gap year for the first time, and they have to recognize the fact that they have to learn how to do what some researchers would call daily life management, like how to make meals, how to manage a schedule, how to pay rent. So if you were to ask an 18 to 20-year-old, like, hey, man, what do you think about God? They're going to go, food, where are my friends? You even heard it on the panel a little bit, like a meal is so awesome. What did you say? Food, meals, or food is the currency of relationship? Was that it? I wrote it down. It was brilliant, right? And I think it's true. I think that sometimes the good news for an earlier young adult is simply meeting their very basic needs and to provide a place for them to feel a sense of connection and belonging. So I think food is great, and I think that's really, really interesting to think about. What happens eventually, though, is that daily life management gets managed. And then what happens is an emerging adult has more space to think about their sort of their life philosophy, their beliefs and everything else. And so I think this really happens like in like ages 20 to 22 to 24, where they really begin to ask more seriously, who am I, where do I fit, and what difference can I make, right? This is usually the place that if you're in college, you switch majors, you move, you end a relationship. This is a moment where all of a sudden you step back and you're like, who am I really? Like, what do I really want to be about? I know that I've been encouraged to get to this point, but I'm not sure that's really who I am. And I actually am going to make some changes in my life. And so these are the places where I think we can have deeper conversations with emerging adults that are just like, I'm trying to figure out my life, and I don't really know how to take that forward, and this is the place to do that. And then, I think what I mentioned before, like as we're moving toward 30s, I think this question of what's your gift and how are you developing it, I think becomes really, really crucial. Like, what's the fingerprint that you want to make in the world, and how do we begin to think about that? And these things are deeply spiritual for them. This is also why, and I had conversations with a number of you this weekend already. You're like, we have this young adult group, and we've got young people and old people, and older young adults, seasoned young adults, and younger young adults. I don't know how to talk about it. And we're really glad to be together, but I feel like we're sort of in different planes. I mean, I think this is it. I think you're asking different questions. Doesn't mean you can't be together, but I think just recognizing the fact that there's some different questions that you're working through in your own faithing journey probably become really, really important. And so this comes back to our question again. What's good news for emerging adults? Well, it depends. Depends where you're at. Depends what you're thinking about. And we want to answer that question particularly, not generally. Really quickly, we know that spiritual transitions and quests that our faith journeys, emerging adults would say, must negotiate new information and experience to recalibrate our quest for identity, belonging, and purpose. It's constantly changing. Our life rhythms don't always match our church rhythms. We can't help it. It's just the way it is. We know that 29% of Americans and 35% of younger millennials identify as nuns, so like a non-affiliation with a denomination. But I think what's important to remember for this is that most nuns that we hear, like in social media or whatever, are theists. Did you know that? Like, most of them believe in God. Like, nuns are not atheists. They are just saying, I'm not affiliated with a particular denomination or religious affiliation. Our lack of attendance doesn't necessarily reflect our desire for participation. And I think we saw this as we moved back and forth, right? Like, I'm not sure how to engage my faith community, but I want to engage it in some ways, but it may not be the traditional ways that we've done before. In some of our latest research, we've actually made a distinction between attendance and participation, and it's been really interesting to see how young adults respond to that. Like, yeah, I don't really go to church service, but there's a small group that I don't miss every week. Yeah, really interesting. And then who will walk even change with us through our faith and doubt journeys? I think that becomes really important. And so I think this is a question that emerging adults are asking. How does my spirituality keep up with my increasingly complex in-motion world? That's the faith in question. Because it's constantly changing, and I think that becomes incredibly important. So here's some questions for you to think about. And then I think what I'm going to do is 5 o'clock, so I'm going to begin to wrap it up. And I'm going to stick around if you guys want to talk. Young adults, what kind of mentors do you want to accompany you in your faithing journeys? Like, I actually think churches want to know that. I think you could be really, really helpful to that. Like, what's worked? What hasn't? We heard some great things on the panel today. Adults, how might young adults help or inspire your own faithing journey? Let's just remember that when we choose to mentor somebody else, it's not them that does the changing. We all do the changing, okay? The scriptures say that where 2 or 3 are gathered, that Jesus is present. So when we choose to mentor someone else, we choose to brush with the holy. Are we ready for it? Yeah, right? I mean, that's why it's scary sometimes, because brushes with the holy are beautiful and scary all at the same time. So I am going to leave you with that. I hope that maybe this faithing concept might unlock something for you personally, or maybe for someone that you know or are mentoring or you care about. I think it opens up new possibilities and new language for how we can think about our own spirituality and our own faith journeys, which I think is really, really important. And I hope that you be blessed by that. And I think I just want to leave you with this. My friends, seasoned and young, may you know that you are loved by God more than you will ever know. May you know that your faithing can take many ways, shapes, and forms, and Jesus promises to walk with you. May you never be embarrassed for asking why questions. May you know that the gospel is always bigger than you can ever imagine. And may you know God's grace and peace.
Okay, for those of you who are watching on live stream, we just want to say thank you for being part of the Young Adult Life Tour. And all of the recordings are going to be archived at the PVC Pleasant Valley Church YouTube channel. So check those out. You can rewatch and watch long term. So live stream, thank you so much, and happy Sabbath. Okay.